Welcome to my live stream. This is spontaneous, which I've been having with my recent live streams because I'm just getting the time and I'm like, I can't edit a video. And lately, this has been the most efficient way to keep giving you guys content, even though I'm so busy lately, especially lately. So welcome to my channel. If you're new to my channel, definitely hit that subscribe button. Today we're talking about filming a wedding in particular, but this will apply for most shooting situations, but I'm going to tailor it towards weddings with the R5. Now, the R5 in itself is a camera of incredible power, and the R5 itself is lauded. A lot of videographers love it and hate it due to the overheating issues. Now, if you're not familiar, the R5 is one of Canon's latest cameras that allows incredible video capability of filming not just standard 1080p video, but 4K at up to 120 frames per second, which is added resolution, and 8K video footage, which is double the size of 4K. And that's just amazed people. But the one problem that this camera has is it doesn't really have vents or anything like that. It's just a camera that's weather sealed pretty well in order for you to take incredible pictures with it and work it like that. But a lot of us want to use it for video, especially weddings. Weddings themselves are incredible when it comes to having slow motion footage, nice shallow depth of fields, getting those right just kind of emotions that are good and almost best captured with slow motion footage of the bride and groom and everyone who attends these weddings. So R5 in itself was thought to be a pretty good weapon until, of course, it really became prevalent that overheating was a problem, especially when it comes to slow motion and those high resolutions. So a lot of people have geared towards the Sony a7S III, which came out shortly after the R5, and it had most of the capabilities of the R5 minus the added resolution for photos and minus the 8K resolution. But it does 4K 120 and it does 1080p at 240 frames per second. So when it comes to a reliable camera body that can do higher frame rates with little to no overheating, the a7S III definitely wins. But where Canon has an advantage is the fact that you can take really high megapixel photos and actually get really high resolution video for those special moments and just have a versatile all-in-one camera. But those of us that want to film with the R5 are left with the issue of, how do I film a video without being concerned? Because you constantly, when you're filming, you get a warning on the camera, especially when you're filming in either the higher 8K resolutions or the 4K 120, that you'll get a timer. Now, I've got plenty of space on my card right now, but I'll show you this. Let's see if I could focus it on just that. You see that 15 minutes that the camera is showing? That is telling me that I can only record this 8K, and I just turned the camera on. I can only record this 8K for 15 minutes. And then shuts off. 4K 120, it gives me a little bit more time to record without overheating, but not by much. So then you run into the issue of, okay, I'm nervous about that clock. How am I going to film this wedding when I'm nervous about that clock? And the point that I'm going to get to and I'm going to lead to is knowing your camera and its limitations. Yes, if people have been filming weddings, I filmed weddings with the Samsung NX1, which does 1080p at 120 frames per second, but 4K at 30. And if you've filmed with older cameras, like I've got the 5D Mark IV behind me, there should be no reason why the R5 should limit you from recording a wedding without problems. So there's a video that I've got playing right up there, and that video is 120 frames per second, and I was recording under a hot light. And then I just wanted to show you, and I guess I could make it bigger, in and out of focus. It's a 4K video of 120 frames per second, slow motion off my Canon camera. And it looks Looks great, right? I can tell you, I recorded that with zero concerns for overheating because I didn't record for a very long time. But it was still fun. I was just trying to test the shot just to have something to play off in the corner above me. So that's what that's about. And that's why I have it there, just because we're talking about slow motion, which would be one of the issues. So on to this video. So you record with the Canon R5 and you've made the decision to shoot a wedding with it. So now what you have to deal with is a full wedding day, which you're probably going to have a lot of batteries or maybe a couple of limited batteries and a lot of memory card space. And now you're going to start the wedding and you want to record as much as possible with no limit. Here's what you do. If you're going to record just standard footage, like for example, the wedding ceremony, or standard just kind of events that are just going to be like a lot of longer video, for example, people dancing or something like that, record in 4K standard mode. Yes, record 4K standard if you want that full frame look at up to 30 frames per second. You could record 24 for that filmic look, which I would do, but if you want, you could record 30 in standard mode. Why? You get high resolution video footage and you get no overheating. The camera will never overheat on you the whole day. But I know what you're telling me. Weddings themselves need a lot of those slow motion effects that we tend to aim for in the industry of filming weddings. Like, what are you doing? I can't record just that all day. I'll never have any nice footage. When you need that added resolution, first of all, you're not going to have the camera on all the time. That's just truth. So there will be times that you can actually turn your camera off. A lot of times that you could turn your camera off and move around and run around. When you're running around a certain spot, it doesn't make sense to turn the camera on and off as you're moving around as much as you can. But when you need that 4K 60 or 4K 120, shoot it. Shoot it as long as you got it. And when you can, because not everything is hours of recording something slow-mo. But if you're recording someone getting dressed, you're recording like the preparations for the wedding and you want that slow motion, just film it 4K 60, 4K 120. But then you're telling me, wait a minute. The whole point is that those modes will cause the camera to overheat. Without that, I'm helpless. Well, when the camera overheats, the camera does not completely lock you out. What happens is the camera will give you the warning of overheating and then shut off. But I suggest that while you're recording, if you start getting the overheating warning flashing, see if there's a moment where you can stop the video or plan around that, especially if you already know what time that you have to record. From then on, you might not like this, but switch to a lower resolution. The R5 can do 1080p at 60 frames per second max. However, this month, it is rumored, and you could basically count it as fact, that it's going to get an update to 120 frames per second in 1080p. Yeah, you don't like that, right? You wanted to deliver your client the highest quality of footage. But the 1080p will have dual pixel autofocus enabled, which will give you tack sharp footage when you need it, because quite honestly, you want to be in focus when you're filming that high resolution. Now, this footage that I'm showing above, it goes out of focus a lot, but it's 4K 120 frames per second video file. But this video file that I've been showing and repeating wasn't originally recorded in 4K. It wasn't originally recorded in 1080p. This footage right here is 720p 4K, 720p footage without autofocus. That's why it's blurry half the time. But it's in 720p, 120 frames per second. That in itself was something that I wouldn't be afraid. Now, I've upresed it to 4K, but I wouldn't be afraid to, of course, when it's actually outputted and I'm done editing, I would not be afraid to give this to a client and edit it in with the video. There's no reason that added resolution is going to give you more added detail. What's up, James Jackson? I loved your video today with DaVinci Resolve and your reactions to it. I watched that. It was pretty cool. I'm glad you're here. So, on to the story. When you're recording in 4K, when you're recording in 1080p, have you ever heard those other settings of, like, for example, you get 8-bit or 10-bit 422 color information, or you get log, or you get 12-bit when you record raw or something like that, right? There's all this other information besides resolution that us creators mention as being important. And that's what I want you to keep in mind when it comes to 4K and 8K, is that it's not the only thing that matters. Resolution is part of it, but the other is the quality of the video footage that you film. So, though this is 720, I'll pull up my desktop. Now I got a bunch of like videos here that I'm going to pull up, but this is 4K at 720p, like I showed you. And let me see if I can find the video file here. No, I don't have it. I was going to show you the R5 recording in 120 frames per second in 4K, and it doesn't look much different than this, except for it's a little bit more sharp. Now, granted, you're on YouTube, it's harder to see the resolution difference and whatnot, but a client, especially when it comes to your work, is going to see what you've done with the footage and how well the story is. They'll probably watch it on their phone, or even if they watch it on their TV. I'm watching it right now next to me on a 4K monitor. And for me, I can lean in and see that fact that it's a little bit softer than the 4K, but it doesn't really matter to me. What matters to me is that a lot of the times the shot is out of focus. So, back to the point. When you're recording, record in 60 frames per second, 1080p, and then when the R5 firmware comes out, you'll have up to 120 frames per second in 1080p. When you're limited with the overheating timer. 4K standard, so you don't overheat, but you can push it on to 4K HQ if you want. However, you'll probably lessen the chance that you'll be able to record 4K 60 and 4K 120 on the camera, because you're will run into issues where you're quickly overheating the camera a lot quicker. And that's what I wanted to tell you on that standpoint. So again, quick summary. Regular speed footage, film in 4K 24 or 4K 30. If you want higher quality, thanks James Jackson, I did want to mention that. If you want higher quality 4K and didn't want to be limited to standard, you could enable 4K crop, which will oversample about a 5K image, a little over 5K image into 4K. So you get higher detail, again, with no overheating concern, which is great. You get to punch in a little bit more, so it's like you have the extra ability to get a little bit more reach, especially weddings when it's absolutely important, because they don't want you in their face recording. So that's definitely a plus. And then of course, those higher frame rate modes you're not completely locked out of higher frame rate modes. You just have to reduce your resolution and work with what you've got. And you could just still record 10-bit 422 in those lower resolution modes, as long as you enable either C-Log or the HDRPQ mode, which allows you to get that little bit more color information. And you'll have incredible looking footage on the R5 without the worry of overheating. Just push it till you can, Bring it down a notch, you'll have great footage, and then just plan around it. And then of course, when you do get breaks, you'll be able to turn off your camera. And I do know creators that have filmed entire weddings with those higher resolution modes and never ever overheat the camera. Just know that just because you're getting close to overheating does not mean that it is impossible to record anything in slow motion when the camera does eventually say you're done with those higher modes. But that's all I've got to say on that regard, and that's all you have to do in order to get the R5 to never overheat on you on a wedding. So basically, I'm done. This was a great time, especially to everyone who's watching live. I have another video planned for tomorrow, hopefully, if not Wednesday. There's a lot of camera news that I want to talk about that I haven't yet. But if you're new to my channel, like I said, definitely consider subscribing because you'd make my day if you do that today. Nothing else to say. Thanks, James. This is Magnus, and I'm out. See you later.